Welcome, Jabbers. This week on Just Another Biz podcast, we have Leah Weinberg, who is the co founder of Auduberg Law LLP. She is an attorney, a recovering wedding planner, and the author of The Wedding Roller Coaster. After nearly a decade in the wedding industry as the owner of Color Pop Events, a New York City based wedding planning company, Leah is returning to her roots as an attorney to assist her former colleagues in the events industry, along with other entrepreneurs and business owners. Her work and insights have been published online and in print with Vogue, The New York Times, People, CNN, CNBC, Bravo, Martha Stewart, and The Knot, among others. A wedding pro educator with The Knot and Wedding Wire since 2020, Leah travels throughout the country and internationally, sharing insight with her peers regionally, as well as at national conferences such as B-Sage Conference, Coterie Retreat, Alt Summit, NACE Experience, and the special event. Welcome, Leah.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah,
We
we're
are so excited for this topic because I think it's something that you brought to our attention. And for anybody tuning in today, we are talking about infusing hospitality into your small business. And this is a fascinating topic. We're in the wedding industry, so we understand what hospitality means. But Leah, tell us a little bit more about, in your opinion, what does hospitality mean?
At the core of it, I feel like hospitality really is all about taking care of other people and how you serve them and honestly how you make them feel. And the reason I suggested this topic was because when I went from wedding planner to attorney, I was a little bit sad because I was like, oh, I'm going to be sort of leaving the hospitality world behind. And then somewhat recently had kind of an aha moment that actually there are plenty of ways that I can be infusing hospitality into our law firm to really make us stand out from other firms out there.
I love that. And so how did you kind of figure out that you could infuse that into your law firm? Because I think when we think about lawyers, we're like, oh my gosh, they're strict to the point, and, you're kind of like scared of them. So I love that idea of like being more of a welcoming attorney law firm for people, especially people in the creative or small business industry.
It was about exactly what you just said, which is the law is scary. And I know that there's also, admittedly inherent distrust with lawyers. Sometimes they don't always have the best reputation. And so my partner Kunbi and I wanted to have a law firm that feels more approachable, that feels less scary, that makes folks feel comfortable when they come to us. One of the biggest complaints that I hear from people when they come to us, if they've never worked with an attorney, the common things that I hear are, it's intimidating, it's scary, there's kind of a lack of trust, I'm afraid I'm going to get ripped off. People that have worked with attorneys before, the most common thing that I hear from them is that they can never get a hold of their attorney, that they constantly are trying to reach out and get some help with something and nobody's getting back to them. And so we're consciously taking these complaints and these kind of thoughts and some that people have, the impression that people have of lawyers and law firms, and we're using that to change up how we're doing business.
That's genius. And personally, my only experience with law stuff is the show Suits, which I'm sure you hear about all the time. It's kind of like when we say we're wedding planners, everyone's like, oh, like J-Lo in the wedding planner. Um, love the drama of the show, but it is such a high stress environment on the show, of course. Would you say your day to day, how does it differ from the show? I'm just curious on a personal level.
Yeah, day to day, it's not super stressful. I do think, though, that in the context of small business owners, when they are getting complaints from their clients, or their clients are coming to them asking for money back, or their clients are threatening litigation, that is terrifying. We can't really sugarcoat that. It is really scary. As a wedding planner, I've been on the receiving end of those things myself, or have friends who have been and now have clients who are. And it's not a fun position to be in. And so we want to help people navigate that. And being accessible and being reachable and being responsive is huge to meeting people where they're at in those situations, because they're sort of panicking. And it's like, okay, knowing that you have somebody to call or to email who's going to get back to you immediately is going to give them so much more peace of mind. But yeah, I don't want to downplay how the emotional reaction that people are going to have when they're faced with those kind of things. It's totally justified. It's really scary, and in some ways it's like you're putting your business on the line and you feel like that. And so it can be really unsettling.
I love that idea because I think if I were to get sued by a client or, whatever it is, I don't even know where to start looking for someone to help specifically with like small business, stuff like that. And so I love that you were sort of like, this is missing in the industry, which kind of leads me to like, what made you decide to close your wedding business and go back? Because I know initially you went to school, like law school, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm
Give
curious
us
if it
the
was just like,
details.
this is
Yeah.
missing or like I'm over wedding planning. What was sort of the like push?
Yeah, I'm telling everybody I'm in my full circle moment right now because I started out as an attorney. I then started my wedding planning company, and now I've come full circle and have gone back to being an attorney. But really, COVID changed, it really just changed the feeling of everything. It changed the landscape of everything, particularly in a place like New York, where for probably like 15 months we were locked down hardcore and could not have events. And it was really stressful. And I know that did a lot to the people planning weddings, the people who had to keep postponing 2, 3, sometimes 4 times. Like just messed with people on a psychological level of having lived through that in a place like New York City where things were so locked down. And so I was finding coming out of COVID, um, the personalities were a little bit more difficult. There was a lot of issues with vendors who were short-staffed, or there were supply shortages. And as a planner, that all flows back up to me, even though it's not my job, even though I can't get you a particular type of tequila, or your florist is overwhelmed and not responding. Like I can't go in her inbox and respond for her. But all of that gets like put back on us because the clients are getting nervous and they need reassurance. And it just really, I just decided to step away. And I think, wedding planning wasn't going to be the super duper long-term thing for me, but COVID definitely um, sped up my exit strategy for sure.
Yeah.
And when I decided to stop taking weddings, I wasn't sure what was next, but I had been doing paralegal work for Kunbi during the pandemic because I didn't have anything else to do. So I was working on people's contracts for her behind the scenes, and she kept joking that I was going to come back to her one day and we were going to start a business. And for 2 years, I swore up and down. I was like, no, this is never going to happen. And then I remember the exact moment where I was driving to a site visit, and the car is where I do my best thinking. And I was like, oh my God, I need to start a law firm with Kunbi. Like in that moment, it felt right. And, I never looked back. I talked to my husband about it, talked to a few friends about it, then like called her the next day and we were like, yep, let's do it. And we really never looked back. We just kept moving forward on it.
And was it your idea? So obviously being a wedding planner before, hospitality, you have to love it, right? Like if you're in wedding planning, you have to understand hospitality and really embrace it and understand that there's customer service and how important it is to your business. So what was the conversation with Kunbi when you came into the business and said, "I love what you're doing here. What are your thoughts on bringing in more hospitality into this law firm type of more strict business?"
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, we started from scratch. So
Okay.
she did have her own firm during the pandemic at the time that I was working with her, and we decided to start a new thing from scratch just so that we could have a new brand, we could have a fresh start, we could set the tone and like make our own rules and not kind of have to follow anything or change anything that already existed. And so it's just been a really natural way for us to move forward. Like we talk, we meet weekly, and obviously we're frankly texting and voxing every day and just like bouncing ideas off of each other of how we can serve people better. What are the common things that we're seeing people come to us for? I was just at a conference and got to stay and have a mastermind day with some friends of mine, and the question that I had for them was, tell me what you see Like, what can law firms do better? If you were to work with a law firm, what do you want to see? How do you want to feel? How can we infuse hospitality into the business more than we already are? So yeah, it's been a discussion from day one and just something that's really top of mind.
And so part 2 to this, um, what did you do in your business to infuse that hospitality?
Yeah, it's about how number one, I mean, it starts from the second that people reach out. So being responsive, especially when somebody's coming to you with, I just got this scary letter from either my client or a lawyer who's representing my client, and I don't know what to do and I need help. So it's the first thing is just being available immediately when people are faced with that. And then it's about how we talk to them when we do initial consultations, like explaining the process, explaining what we do, being upfront and clear on our fee structure. All of that makes folks feel better. The number of times I hear from people who we do, like I'll do a 15, 30-minute consult with, the number of times that they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better already is enormous. Like that's one of the most common pieces of feedback. And it's really funny because that was the exact same feedback I always got from my planning clients when I was booking them. They were like, "Oh, you're making us feel like less stressed already." And so it's just, I mean, you can learn hospitality, but also some of us just have something built in. And so I have a natural ability to make people feel better and put people at ease and help them feel more confident. And so we hear from those initial consults like, oh, I feel so much better. And then after we've worked with folks, if we're redoing their contracts or representing them in a dispute, the feedback is the same. It's always like, oh, I feel so much more confident in my business. I feel so much more protected. I feel so much more legit having a real contract. And so it's been surprisingly rewarding in that way to like realize that we're helping people in a really meaningful way. And it really comes down to how we're serving them, how we are making them feel when they're working with us.
And are you guys doing mostly just like one-on-one like consultations, calls with people, or are you wanting to do more like group things or have online resources available, or is it mostly that one-on-one so you can sort of have that like hospitality a part of that?
Yeah, it's mostly the one-on-one. One of the things that I told Kunbi when we were starting things was that I wanted this to be a traditional law firm. I wanted it to be the traditional law firm model. I know that there's some folks that do subscription-based like legal services, or they're doing groups with programs and stuff like that. And for the time being, we just kind of want to focus on those one-on-one clients, and it's been working great so far. And not, I mean, from a business perspective, not having to worry about promoting products or promoting like unique services or having to do launches. We're able to take all of that brain space and mental energy that goes into like having to promote a whole bunch of different things and just focus it on like, we have a law firm. Here's what we do. Here's who we serve. These are the states we work in. Like, let's do it.
Yeah,
Okay,
and I
and
feel I
sorry,
was
go
gonna
ahead.
say I feel like it's already different because you are like a nice law firm. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like it's like you already have this special like sauce about you guys that you're like, we're different or we're offering this that isn't really seen for small business owners.
Yeah, and I mean, luckily, like I'm not gonna lie, having been in the wedding industry for 10 years and both of us being small business owners ourselves for 10 years, we have a reputation amongst people in the wedding industry specifically and other small business owners in general where there is trust built in. So many people have said, "Oh, I knew that I needed a lawyer, but I didn't know who to work with." And as soon as they saw that like we were offering this service, they're like, "Oh, great. I feel great working with you. Like, let's do it."
Well, and I was gonna say, also bring up that you're a traditional law firm is interesting because I think we are in a world, and Carrie and I had an episode about outsourcing recently, and we are in a world of subscriptions and apps and all these things. And I understand the concept behind it, but not every person is capable of handling all of those things themselves. And I think legal matters is bookkeeping and legal matters are the things that I am going to pass off right away. And I want it handled properly by a professional. And I want to be able to ask the questions that are specific to me. I think the challenge in like a group setting and a subscription model or is you have to sort through all of the information to find what applies to you. And that can be really confusing. And it can honestly, for some people, waste a lot of time where it's better for them to just pay a bit of a higher rate, get the answers right away, be done, move on, keep booking clients, you know? So I can appreciate that you're sticking with the traditional model for now.
Yes. And even though my friends are trying to get us to get on TikTok, which I am fighting tooth and nail, we are trying to like be, we don't want to be stuff. We want to be a traditional law firm in that sense of like, these are our traditional services. Obviously, we are not traditional people. And you will find Kunbi on TikTok, and she doesn't know this yet, but I think she's gonna have to be in charge of the firm's TikTok pretty soon.
It's kind of like you have to do it now, whether you want to or not. I mean, I had a TikTok account for a little bit, but I let it slide. But it is sort of like it's a hard decision of like staying relevant or like finding, I guess, where your audience is too. And like maybe you try it and it's worth it. Maybe it's not worth it. And you're like, we don't need TikTok.
Yeah, I think from what I've heard, I mean, again, I am not on TikTok. I get all of my TikToks forwarded to me by like mostly just one friend who sees stuff that he knows would be interesting and sends it to me. But I do think that just like Kunbi is really great on social media. And I am optimistic that if we, put some time and energy into TikTok, that it could be actually really beneficial. I am just, like I said, just really trying to fight it really hard.
So, okay, switching gears a little bit for other people's businesses, what are ways that they can infuse hospitality into their business? And I guess part two, I always have a part two to my questions. I apologize. I have a lot of thoughts when I'm saying them. Um, for example, some of the role or some of the things that you named for the law firm, do they include hiring an additional person to take on an extra task? Or for someone who's just starting out, maybe what are a few ideas that they could do right away that just infuses a little bit extra hospitality?
Yeah, the responsiveness to inquiries and people reaching out honestly is it's kind of a really low lift, and it's going to be really impactful. I know there's advice out there that talks about, not living in your inbox and not necessarily having to be the first and stressing yourself out and all of that stuff. But being responsive and sometimes being the first is really going to be helpful. Just shows people that you're responsive, that you are available. And this is not to say that you need to have no boundaries. Like I am a firm believer in like we need to have boundaries. But like during typical office hours, if you are sitting at your desk and an email inquiry comes in and it's not going to disrupt too much to just pop over and take care of that. That's really going to go a long way. And speaking of the outsourcing thing, I know there are plenty of people who struggle with email. And so outsourcing to a VA who can monitor your inbox and can have sort of like canned template responses that they can send, but it still be personalized is really helpful. And then, I mean, my favorite is gifting. Gifting is my love language. I just gave a talk at B Sage about how to write and self-publish a book, and I was very candid about like numbers and how much things cost and stuff like that, and I was like, one of the reasons my book has not been profitable is because I spent so much money on gifting. So that's just a huge piece. Depending on your business, like in some contexts it makes more sense than others. But onboarding gifts, especially for people in the wedding industry, can be really helpful. I know that when I made a switch from I used to just send like sugar fina candy to my clients when they signed on as with me when I was a wedding planner. And when I switched to custom gift boxes, I worked with an amazing company called By Dami Studios, which I'll send you the link so you can put it in the show notes. But once I started working with her on custom stuff, the responses I got were just tremendous. It was everything from like, oh, this just reaffirms that we made the right decision in working with you, or oh, you just really get us. Like, it was such a huge difference in sending just a regular gift is nice, but taking that time to do something custom, a little more tailored to your business, to the people that you work with, you see just a huge difference in the reaction that it gets, which is pretty mind-blowing.
I think, yeah, your point of like responding promptly to inquiries, like so many times, I would say like I usually respond within 24, 48 hours max if I'm like out of the office. But so many people respond. They're like, wow, thanks so much for the quick response. And I was like, I thought I waited too long to get back to you. And so it is interesting because that even gives me insight that like other people aren't getting back to them within sometimes days or a week. And that is a big tell into like how they're going to respond throughout the entire process. And so I agree. Like you said, it's a low lift, but it's so impactful for your business too.
Yeah, and what we see so much when it comes to client disputes, a lot of times the thing that clients are unhappy about is communication and
Mm.
responsiveness. And so that piece of being able to stay on top of communication, get back to your clients, make sure it's clear responses, that is a huge piece of just being a good business owner. And like I said, not everybody is great at email. So you need to figure out what you're not good at and figure out how to outsource for that.
For sure. So as someone who I'm a highly sensitive person. And so, I think in my business, I definitely take things personally, but I'm very much like an empath, right? And so, like, I know, like, what does that look like for those people for hospitality, and how can that sort of be more of their thing, like their special sauce? But also, I know sometimes it can be a pitfall for people like me and running a business.
I literally just gave a talk on this 3 weeks ago at the special event. It's called How to Survive the Wedding, how an empath can survive in the wedding industry, because I am also an empath and also a highly sensitive person. So for being real, that's also one of the reasons why I had to step out, was because I knew that I could not set enough boundaries to stop taking things personally and to stop investing emotionally in my clients. And most of the times, like, it's great and we build really great relationships and we know how to take care of people. We see those really subtle shifts and cues and can pick up on that and know how to act. Like, we can be at an event and we see our client having a conversation with somebody and we're reading body language and we know that they're uncomfortable and we can tell that like they don't want to be there. We go over there and we're say, hey, so sorry to interrupt, like, let me just borrow you for a minute and get them out of the situation. Or we see somebody sort of like looking around, like it looks like they're looking for something. We know, we go up to them and we're like, hey, how can we help? That is our superpower. We see the nuance and understand people's behavior. And that pitfall is, like you said, we just take things so personally, even if they are not our fault. I can think of a million examples from my wedding planning when something went awry and it had absolutely nothing to do with me. And yet at the end of the day, I felt responsible for it. Like, my mind was like, oh, you had nothing to do with this. But my body still felt like, oh, I've disappointed somebody. I've let somebody down. And so you really have to be mindful of how you're spending your energy in those situations. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of practice and self awareness to know how to do that and when you need to do that. Like, it's tough. I mean, again, it is like that is one of the reasons why I had to step out.
Yeah, I mean, I have stirred on things for weeks post event before that wasn't even like anything in my control, right? It's like something that just is like maybe guests didn't do or like whatever it was, it's usually something that's like not me. It's usually another vendor, because I feel like I can rationalize the things that I'm like, okay, I can learn from the situation. Maybe I didn't do that the best, but it's like the things that aren't my fault because I feel horrible for the client, right? Because as a wedding planner, you're sort of like, our goal is that they're happy at the end of the day. So if I can't make them happy, you feel like you kind of failed at your job. And so it is setting those boundaries and sort of being like, no, I'm good at my job. I have taken care of them and I did the best that I could.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to also chalk it up to knowing that some people are never going to be happy no matter what. Some people are going to frankly regret some of the decisions they made on their wedding day, and that could cloud their perception of the day as a whole. But again, it had nothing to do with us. Like, we did our job, but they just kind of made some choices that they were embarrassed by or weren't super proud of. Um, that kind of thing. So we just have to know, we just have to realize that that's going to happen, and that is a possibility.
Yeah, my follow-up question to that, would your advice or suggestions be for people just to set better boundaries with their clients? Because like you said, we are good at infusing that hospitality and making sure they're taken care of, but what's sort of that like boundary so that it's not a pitfall for people running a business?
What I discovered, and it was hard, was honestly like consciously keeping clients at like arm's length distance almost. Because for the majority of my career, I prided myself on the relationships that I formed. That was one of the things included in my sales pitch. I was like, I want to get to know you. If your family's in town and they want to go see the venue, like, I want to go there with them. I want to build relationships with them. I want to have rapport with them. And I would say for the last year, I had to honestly put a stop to that. And I felt it because I knew that I was interacting with my clients in a different way. I don't necessarily know that they could tell the difference, although I was, of course, paranoid that they're like, oh, they can tell that I'm not like being their best friend, and they feel like they're not getting the same level of service. But like at the end of the day, for the most part, they were getting that same level of service. But I had to consciously just be like, oof, I can't take this. I can't take all of this on for them. I can't be the therapist. And it felt weird to me. It felt disingenuous, but it was honestly a self-preservation technique that I had to use so that I just wasn't drained and feeling like taken advantage of. And I mean, one of the key things that happened was a wedding, and the best way to describe it, honestly, was kind of like I felt betrayed by the client after because of their dissatisfaction with some things that were completely out of my control, because it was like I invested so much in their wedding planning process and spent so much time with them that to have their reaction after the fact be what it was felt like I had been betrayed. Which sounds
Yeah.
silly, but
No,
that's like
yeah,
the
that's
reality when you feel the way that we feel,
yeah.
it
You're like,
happens.
I don't know how I could have been any nicer to you
Yep.
or like provided a better service. And so it makes you almost question, like, am I good at this? Did I do a good enough job for them? But I think it's important to remember that clients aren't our friends. It's like a business transaction. Granted, some of those have become friends afterwards, but I think like while that relationship is going on, like they are paying you for your service, and to kind of remember to keep that boundary, I think too.
Yep.
On that note, too, I wanted to ask, is there such thing as taking hospitality too far? So perhaps it turns into like an uncomfortable overgiving to somebody. Um, as a terrible gifter myself, I'm not in the guy that is not my love language. I skip most people's birthdays. Um, that's I overgive, and that's kind of what the conversation we were just having, but overgive in the sense of um not coddling, but almost like, "Oh, what can I do? Oh, let me fix that." Oh, like a nervous energy that I find myself like if I'm not getting a certain verbal approval from something, if there's no exclamation point at the end of the sentence after I presented my proposal, I'm like crying, And it's a terrible it's a the hos being someone hospitable is a blessing and a curse, the empath, that goes there too, but what do you think about kind of taking hospitality too far, and what would that line be?
There's definitely ways to be too accommodating. And it's funny you bring up the example about the feedback, because I remember shortly after I started my company and left the corporate world, I was chatting with a dear friend of mine who had also left corporate and had started a stationery business. And one of the things that we kind of lamented was there was not that same sort of like positive feedback, or nobody was there to like pat you on the back and tell you that you were doing a good job. And so it constantly sort of felt like we weren't doing a good job because we didn't have people giving us that feedback. So we definitely, number one, have to learn to provide that to ourselves, to like find a way to fulfill that need ourselves and kind of not put so much stock in people's reactions. But absolutely, that we can all get in our own way and just go too above and beyond. I mean, we want to make people happy. We want to do a good job. And so that often leads to us doing things outside of the scope of work that we're being paid for. I remember a particular client where it felt like they could never really get anything done unless I was physically there with them. And so in that situation, I offered way too much of my like in-person time, but it was sort of like, well, we're not going to get this done unless I'm in person. And I just didn't draw, like, the boundaries were not drawn there. So I think we have to be, it's a lot of self-awareness. You have to understand, if you are like that, how to watch out for that as a pitfall. Because yeah, we are gonna go above and beyond. If a vendor's not doing something on a wedding day, we're gonna step in. Or if we feel like our clients aren't getting something, we're gonna try to do extra for them. And that always is gonna come to at our detriment and expense.
Yeah.
And with that, I guess, what are some ideas that you would say people could do to infuse this into their business? And I know you had mentioned via email like less automation, and so I'm curious to hear a little bit more
Mm.
about that. Because I know it might be controversial for people, because I feel like everything now is like automate, automate. Work smarter, not harder. And so I would love to kind of hear like what are some things people could infuse, and also your take on less automation.
So I think the less automation talk, I need to preface it with, I am not a tools person. I'm naturally very organized, and organization and processes and workflows comes very naturally to me. And I have tried to use tools and they just don't work with my brain. I've worked with like VAs or other folks that are like, have me on Asana or Airtable or ClickUp or Notion. And I'm like, I don't understand any of this. This is not how my brain operates. Or like being on the receiving end of certain CRMs and not being able to like see who's being CC'd on the communication and stuff like that. All of that, I think, depending on the person, can create friction. So you have to understand what is going to be most helpful for your clients, what is causing friction for them, and figure out how to work in that way. And I think when things become too automated, and of course, it depends on the type of business that you have, but if you are a high touch business that prides itself on the experience that your clients are getting, too much automation is going to make things feel less personal. And also maybe not accounting for how people's brains work. I know that right now there's a lot of talk on neurodivergency and how we can be more inclusive from that perspective. And so forcing clients to work within certain like software that we've paid money for just because we've paid money for it and that's how we like to work, that might not be how they like to work. Somebody's sent me Basecamp. I think my wedding planner had me in Basecamp, and I think I logged into that thing once. It just doesn't necessarily make sense to me. So yeah, from the automation piece, I would say it's definitely something to be careful of. I want you to have an efficient working process. I don't want you reinventing the wheel, but having different copy and paste templates that you can have for emails as opposed to having an autoresponder, I think is an easy way to make things a little bit more personal and customized and not cost yourself a lot of time to have to implement.
And I think even with automation, I think often of like, I mean, I have templates for my business and some of them aren't on like a auto send type of thing, because I want to curate that email based on like maybe something they said. But I have seen other companies, send an automated email, and I think sometimes it is frustrating because I see like 5 different points on there that I'm like, we've already talked about this. And so it kind of feels like they're not really caring about you when things do feel automated because it's like, well, we've talked about the timeline and this thing already. And now you're like asking again for this. And so I think, having that line of like having the templates, but then customizing them, and maybe it's setting reminders for yourself to like send it out on that date versus it like automatically sending to clients.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to distinguish between automation in terms of having a system and a process so that you're doing the same system and process every time, but not automation in the sense of it being automatic. Like I kind of want you to have to hit a button to make
Right.
something do something so that there's a little bit of personalization to it, but I don't want you reinventing the wheel and doing something custom every single time.
And like you said, Leah, I think it depends on the person's business model and what who they're serving and what they're selling because going back to the communication piece and how that is the easiest part, responding quickly and communicating with your audience is the easiest part to infuse hospitality into your business. And if you are working with volume, you almost have to bring in that automation piece because you are selling perhaps a lower ticket item. It's about quantity. But in our scenario where we're in the wedding industry, we're selling a high ticket item. And if you are struggling with keeping up with your demand, then you either need to up your price and you need to start taking less. And that's the big conversation we keep having in the wedding industry. And I'm sure in a lot of other service industries right now is if your client wants that one-on-one attention, which they should get, then you need to start taking less and increasing your price point. But there is certainly a place for automation, but I think to your point in our service type industry, with that higher ticket price for our service, you've got to customize it.
Yeah, and even in those higher the higher volume type businesses, and especially in the wedding industry, this was something that I talked about frequently, was creating certain points of connection. So I get it. There are DJ companies, especially if they sort of work more like agencies where they're subbing out like DJs and they have, 10 events every weekend or something like that. That is high volume. I get it. You're going to have to like figure out an easy way for that to flow. But make an but if it comes to this, have an automatic email that goes out like 6 months before the wedding or 3 months before the wedding, just to say, hey, hope you're doing well. Just a reminder, you'll hear from me again, like when we're 2 months out. But if you need anything, let me know. I mean, we're all planners here, and I know that you've gotten the same questions that I have, which is, I haven't heard from my DJ or my photographer since we booked them. Are they okay? Is everything okay? Is something wrong? And it's like, these people are inadvertently creating fear in their workflow process because they haven't been communicative. So if you are high volume, you can still you can still be automated and create these moments of connection and touch points and hospitality just by checking in. And again, if it has to be an automated email, it has to be an automated email. I think that is better than nothing in those situations, but just making sure that you're having these connection points with your clients because people aren't doing it. And so that is what's going to make you stand out.
So simple to make you stand out from other people,
It's not
honestly.
hard. It's
Yeah,
not hard,
truly.
people.
I've loved it talking about this. Has been really fascinating, actually. But I would love to kind of, wrap it up. Leah, what would you say is some advice that you would give yourself maybe 5, 10 years ago that would also benefit other entrepreneurs?
Yeah, there's two things. So one kind of gets to the point of like, why did I want to talk about hospitality anyway? So I went through an exercise. A friend of mine named Crystal Whitaker she talks a lot about core values and has exercises and programs to help people identify their core values, align with their core values, be more inclusive in their businesses. And so in working with her, I went through the core values exercise. And I definitely sat on it and marinated on it for quite a bit. And so ultimately I came up with authenticity, connection, and hospitality. And so I feel like if I had identified those things earlier on in my wedding planning career, it could have shaped my business a little bit differently. It probably would have helped me level up a little bit earlier. So that's definitely like a piece of advice I would give to my younger self is focus on those core values earlier on in your business, just to make sure that you are creating a business that really aligns with who you are as a person. And then the second piece is community building and really putting a focus on building a strong community of fellow small business owners. I know we all kind of, when you first start a small business, you have friends that don't have their own businesses. And if we're being honest, they don't really know what we're going through. And so sometimes those friendships can like fall by the wayside a little bit, or they just become, they serve a different role in your life because you can't talk to them about all the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. And so while I now have an incredible community of people who I've let in and I support and allow them to support me, which is a big one. And I ask for help from, which is a big thing that I know not all of us are very good at doing. And so I would tell my younger self to like open yourself up to that community sooner. Like let them in, let them help you, let them support you, and vice versa. Be their cheerleaders, be their support, and be giving to them. So yeah, it's not like I didn't have a community when I started or shortly into my business, but I feel like my view on community has become so much richer since then.
Yeah. And I think a key element to that too is like befriend people that do the same thing you do, right? Like Gabby and I have been friends for a long time and we both do the same thing. And I think people get scared of that, of being like, well, I can't be friends with these other DJs or wedding planners or whatever it is that they do that's similar to you because you feel like it's competition. But honestly, I feel like we've found so much value in just connecting with people that do the same thing as us and have been able to like get more business because we share referrals and, give out those referrals when we're like, oh, that's not a fit for me, but like, Gabby, this is perfect for you, or, vice versa. And so I feel like just keeping in mind that you can be friends with people that you might deem as competition, but they're really not at the end of the day.
That was 100% what surprised me the most. I think getting into the wedding industry was the value that being friends with other wedding planners had, and not ultimately seeing them as like the people who were true friends. Like you get past that competition piece and it just becomes they are so helpful to have in your life.
Mhm.
And Leah, where can people find you and how can they work with you?
Yes. So our website is oduberg.com. I am at the Leah Weinberg and Oduberg Law on Instagram. And for anybody listening who might be a small business owner who feels like they need legal services, they are welcome to reach out. We are currently working with clients in New York, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, and Florida. And then we have hopes to expand to Illinois and California in the near future, fingers crossed. But yeah, if anybody needs anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are always happy to help.
And which I was also going to ask, how, not like, how early can people reach out to you in the sense of what kind of question is a valid question to ask a lawyer?
Oh yeah, the people are welcome to. We've had people reach out before they even really have anything for us to work on. They just kind of want to start that relationship, and that's one of the things I always talk about is start a relationship with an attorney before you actually need one. Like get to know them. I want to get to know your business. I want to explain how our fees work so that way if something does come up, you know whether you know how much you have to budget for it, or you know whether you're going to be able to afford it or not. So there's plenty of times we have these initial calls with folks just to get to know them and explain our process. And, then maybe they come back like a month later, a couple months later, or, sometimes TBD when they actually have something for us to work on.
Hopefully never,
Yeah.
but not for your business sake.
Yeah,
Yes.
not for your business sake.
Hopefully it's not a client dispute. Hopefully it's happy
Right.
and like
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
expanding your team and you need contracts, or you're going to lease space and you need somebody to review a lease for you, and good
Yeah.
stuff. We want
Yeah,
we want good business growth stuff that we
Yes.
can help you
for
with.
sure. Love that. Well, Leah, thanks so much. This was really fun to actually talk about and just like get more insight into it, and just excited to share your business with other people because I know it's exciting for me to be like, okay, once you guys are in California,
Yes.
but it is like great just to have this awareness of like, oh my gosh, there is this business of lawyers that are providing this service that I feel like has really been lacking in this community.
Yep. Yeah, we're like I said, I've kind of stumbled into how rewarding this was actually going to be, and we've just helped so many people in their businesses, and it's great to see, and we're just really passionate about helping as many people as we can.
Amazing. Love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
again for having
you.
me.